Hello dear students, hope you all are safe and fine and studying these days with full concentration and focused minds. I know children that now you are eagerly waiting for your today's lesson. So today we will study lesson 16 of science, that is management of natural resources for class 10th. But children, before we begin with our lesson, let us see that what we already know about this lesson. Children, I think that you have already studied about the natural resources like air, water and soil, and you also know that how these various components are cycled over and over again in nature. Then you also have learned in your previous chapter how various human activities are polluting these natural resources and causing the environmental pollutions. Dear children, let us now see that what new we are going to learn today in this chapter. Principle of 3 R's. Why do we need to manage our resources? Forest and wildlife. Importance of water, dams, water harvesting and water conservation. And towards the end of the lesson, we will discuss about coal and petroleum. Principle of 3 R's. Children, you must have all heard about 3 R's: reduce, recycle and reuse, which are employed for the protection of our environment. But what do they actually indicate? Reduce means that we should use the resources in as less amount as possible. We can save the electricity by switching off the electric fans and bulbs when they are not in use. Similarly, we can save the water by repairing the leaking taps in time. We should also not waste the food. Children, can you think of some more such things whose use can be reduced? Recycle. This indicates that things made of plastics, paper, glass, some metals, etc. should be recycled in order to obtain some useful products from them. Until and unless it is not very essential, their new production is not advisable. For their recycling, we need to segregate this waste first so that the material which can be recycled is not dumped along with the garbage into the landfills. Reuse. This means using the same product again. This is actually even better than recycling because in recycling some energy is expended, but in this method you can use the same product again and again. For example, instead of throwing the carry bags in which you bring fruits and vegetables from the market, you can use them again for some other purpose. Similarly, plastic bottles and boxes in which you get eatables like sauce, jams, mayonnaise, etc. can be reused for storing things in the kitchen. Now, the question on which we should think over is that why do we need to manage our resources? Children, not just roads and buildings, but all the things we use or consume like food, clothes, books, toys, furniture, tools and vehicles are obtained from resources on this earth. The only thing that we get from outside is energy, which we receive from the sun. Even this energy is processed by living organisms and various physical and chemical processes on the earth before we make use of it. So, don't you think that we need to use our resources carefully? Also because they are not unlimited. Children, with the human population increasing at a tremendous rate due to the improvement in healthcare, the demands for all these resources are increasing at an exponential rate, which once again tells us that we should use our resources judiciously. Water as a resource and its management. Children, this graph shows the level of coliform bacteria in the waters of river Ganga. Coliform is a group of bacteria found in human intestines whose presence in water indicates contamination by disease-causing microorganisms. The river Ganga runs its course of over 2500 kilometers from Gangotri in the Himalayas to Ganga Sagar in the Bay of Bengal. Do you know that it is being turned into a drain by more than 100 towns and cities in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and West Bengal that pour their garbage and excreta into it. In addition, think of the pollution caused by other human activities like bathing, washing of clothes and immersion of ashes and unburned corpses. Not only this, but the industries are further increasing the pollution load of river Ganga by adding their chemical effluents into the river water to such a high level that this toxicity is killing the fish in large section of the river. Our resources are being unthinkingly exploited by various human activities. But now the time has come when awareness about the problems caused by such exploitation is spreading in the society and some action plans are being undertaken. You must have heard about the Ganga Action Plan. This multi-crore project came about in 1985 for the protection of river Ganga because the quality of the water in Ganga was deteriorating day by day. Forests and wildlife. Children, forests are the biodiversity hotspots. One measure of the biodiversity of an area is the number of species found in that area. However, the range of different life forms is also important. One of the main aims of conservation of this resource is to try and preserve the biodiversity that we have inherited. Experiments and field studies suggest that a loss of diversity may lead to a loss of ecological stability. Children, when we consider the conservation of forests, we also need to look at who the stakeholders of the forest are. The first category of the stakeholders are the people who live in or around forests and are dependent on forest products for various aspects of their life. Second is the forest department of the government, which owns the land and controls the resources from forests. Then the third type of stakeholders are the industrialists, from those who use tendu leaves to make beedis to the ones engaged with paper mills. And the last type are the wildlife and nature enthusiasts who want to conserve nature in its original form. Now, let us take a look at what each of these groups get out of the forest. The local people need large quantities of firewood, small timber and thatch. Bamboo is used to make slats for huts and baskets for collecting and storing food materials. Implements for agriculture, fishing and hunting are largely made of wood, Also, forests are sites for fishing and hunting. In addition to people gathering fruits, nuts, and medicines from the forest, their cattle also graze in the forest area or feed on other fodder which is collected from forests. Do you think such a use of forest resources would lead to the exhaustion of these resources? Do not forget that before the British came and took over our country, people had been living in these forests for centuries. They had developed practices to ensure that the resources were used in a sustainable manner. But once the British took over the control of our forests, they started exploiting them ruthlessly for their own purposes, putting our forest resource into a big danger. For this reason, the Forest Department in India took over the control and management of forests from the British after the independence. But local knowledge and local needs still continue to be ignored in the management practices. Thus, vast tracts of forests got converted into monoculture of trees like pine, teak or eucalyptus. But one good result of such plantations was that they became useful not only for the industries to access specific products, but also became an important source of revenue for the forest department. Children, do you know that how many industries depend on forest products as a source of raw material for their factories? Industries involved in making timber, paper, lac, sports goods are a few examples of such industries. Lastly, let us discuss about the nature and wildlife enthusiasts who are in no way dependent on the forest but who may have considerable say in their management. They initially started their work with the conservation of large animals like lions, tigers, elephants and rhinoceros. But now these conservationists recognize the need to preserve the biodiversity as a whole. So, should we not give enough recognition to such people who have become a part of forest system? Let us now discuss about Chipko movement. Chipko movement was the result of a grassroots level effort to end the alienation of people from their forests. This movement originated in a remote village called Reni in Garhwal, high up in the Himalayas during the early 1970s. This dispute started between a logging contractor and the local villagers, as he had been given a contract to cut the trees in a forest close to the village. On one particular day, the contractor's workers came in the forest to cut the trees, while the local menfolk were not present there. Without any fear, the women of the village reached the forest quickly and hugged the trees. This prevented the workers from cutting the trees, and the contractor had to withdraw from his work. Sustainable management. Sustainable management means management or use of resources in such a way that they meet the human needs not only in present time but also in future. The government can play a great role in the sustainable management of the resources by fixing some rules and regulations, like prohibition of illegal actions and giving punishment to the guilty. Industries can also help in the management of natural resources by planting of trees, by following all the rules and regulations, by proper disposal of waste, and by paying proper prices for the natural resources that they are using. Children, we can also contribute towards this by following the 3R principle of reduce, reuse and recycle. Water for all. Water is a basic necessity for all the terrestrial forms of life. Water is used for agriculture, in industries, for drinking, cooking food, bathing, cleaning, and many other purposes. We have studied in our previous class about the importance of water and the water cycle. A study of rainfall patterns does not reveal the whole truth behind the water availability in various regions in India. Rains in India are largely due to the monsoons. This means that most of the rainfalls in a few months of the year, despite nature's monsoon bounty, failure to sustain water availability underground has resulted largely from the loss of vegetation cover, diversion from high water demanding crops, and pollution from industrial effluents and urban waste. Irrigation methods like dams, tanks, and canals have been used in various parts of India since ancient times. Earlier, these were managed by the local people who assured that the basic minimum requirement for both agriculture and daily needs were met throughout the year. The use of this stored water was strictly regulated and the optimum cropping patterns were arrived at on the basis of water availability. The maintenance of these irrigation systems was also a local affair. Dams. Children, do you have any idea that why do we seek to build dams? This is largely because building of large dam ensures the storage of adequate water not just for irrigation but also for generating electricity. For example, the Indira Gandhi Canal has brought greenery to considerable areas of Rajasthan. Dams also help to control the floods. Some other examples of dams that have been constructed are Bhakra Nangal Dam, Sardar Sarovar Dam and Tehri Dam. The people who get displaced by such various developmental projects are largely the poor tribals who do not get any benefits from these projects and are alienated from their lands and forests without adequate compensations. You must have heard about the protests by the Narmada Bachao Andolan about raising the height of the Sardar Sarovar Dam on river Narmada. Criticism about large dams addresses three problems in particular. The first problem is social problem because they displace large number of peasants and tribals without adequate compensation or rehabilitation. The second problem is economic problem because they swallow up huge amounts of public money without the generation of proportionate benefits. And the third problem is environmental problem because they contribute enormously to deforestation and the loss of biological diversity. Water harvesting. Watershed management emphasizes scientific soil and water conservation in order to increase the biomass production. The main aim is to develop primary resources of land and water to produce secondary resources of plants and animals for use in a manner which will not cause ecological imbalance. Watershed management. Watershed management not only increases the production and income of the watershed community but also mitigates drought and floods and increases the life of the downstream dam and reservoirs. Water harvesting is an age-old concept in India. Khadins, tanks and nadis in Rajasthan, bandharas and tals in Maharashtra, bandis in Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, ahars and pines in Bihar, kuls in Himachal Pradesh, ponds in the Kandi belt of Jammu region and Aries in Tamil Nadu, etc. are some of the ancient water harvesting, including water conveyance structures still used today. Water harvesting techniques are local specific and benefits are also localized. Giving local people control over their water resources ensures that mismanagement and overexploitation of these resources is reduced. Over 400 years ago, in some parts of Himachal Pradesh, a local system of canal irrigation evolved called the kuls. The water flowing in the streams was diverted into man-made channels, which took this water to numerous villages down the hillside. The management of these schools was done by common people along with the common agreement among all the villages. Interestingly, during the planting season, water was first used by the village farthest away from the source of the kul, then by the villages progressively higher up. These kuls were managed by 2 or 3 people who were paid by the villagers. After the kuls were taken over by the government, most of them became defunctional and there is no amicable sharing of water as before. Coal and petroleum. Children, let us now discuss about a very important resource, that is fossil fuels like coal and petroleum, which are important sources of energy for us. The management of these energy sources involves slightly different perspectives from those resources that we have discussed earlier. Coal and petroleum were formed from the degradation of biomass millions of years ago. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have been using increasing amounts of energy to meet our basic needs and for the manufacture of a large number of goods upon which our lives depend. These energy needs have been largely met by the reserves of coal and petroleum. Children, do you know that out of the total electricity generated, about 37% is generated from coal, as coal is much cheaper than all other sources. But looking to other sources of energy is not the only consideration when we look at the consumption of coal and petroleum. Since coal and petroleum have been formed from biomass, in addition to carbon, these contain hydrogen, nitrogen and sulfur. When these are burned, the products are carbon dioxide, water, oxides of nitrogen and oxides of sulfur. When combustion takes place in insufficient supply of air, then carbon monoxide is formed instead of carbon dioxide. Of these products, the oxides of sulfur and nitrogen and carbon monoxide are poisonous gases, and carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Another way of looking at coal and petroleum is that they are huge reservoirs of carbon, and if all this carbon is converted to carbon dioxide, then the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will increase, leading to intense global warming. Thus, we need to use these resources judiciously. Children, it is but obvious that if we do not manage all these resources properly, then our coming generations will have to face many problems. In order to save energy, all of us have to work together, like judicious using of electricity, adopting the principle of 3R, taking a bus instead of using your own personal vehicle, walking or cycling to your workplace, using bulbs or fluorescent tubes in your homes, taking the stairs instead of using lifts, wearing an extra sweater in winters rather than using a heating device, and by planting trees. By adopting all these changes in our lifestyles, we can save energy. Let us now quickly revise whatever we have learned in this chapter. Today we have learned that our reservoirs like forest, wildlife, water, coal and petroleum need to be used in a sustainable manner. We can reduce pressure on the environment by sincerely applying the maxim of reduce, reuse and recycle in our lives. Management of forest resources has to take into account the interest of various stakeholders. The harnessing of water resources by building dams has social, economic and environmental problems associated with it. The fossil fuels, coal and petroleum will ultimately be exhausted. Because of this and because of their consumption pollutes our environment, we need to use these resources judiciously. Children, now I will ask you some questions and hope that you will be able to answer them all correctly. So, here is my first question. What are the 3 R's to save the environment? And the correct answer is the 3 R's are reduce, reuse and recycle. My next question. Name any 5 products that we get from forest. And the answer is wood, rubber, medicines, lac and honey. Next question, children. Why do we construct dams? And the answer is dams are constructed to store water in adequate amounts. This water can be used not only for irrigational purposes but also for generating electricity. Yes, children, my next question is name 2 important fossil fuels. And the answer is coal and petroleum. With this, we come to the end of our today's lesson, that is management of natural resources. I hope, children, you must have found this lesson meaningful and interesting, and also hope that you all have enjoyed learning the lesson with me. Children, stay safe, stay happy and keep learning. Goodbye children and thank you.